This is a story about choices, the kind we make every day that define who we are and who we might become. It's about a quiet man with a mysterious past, a group of troubled teens searching for their place in the world, and the unexpected bond that changes all of their lives forever. But it's not just a story about transformation, it's a story about strength, not in fighting back, but in standing firm. When a dangerous bully tests the limits of their patience, the lesson becomes more than words. What happens next will surprise you and might just leave you questioning what true strength really means. But how does a single encounter in this quiet park spark a chain of events that no one could have predicted? And what does it take to truly change for better or for? If you're ready to be inspired, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. And let us know in the comments, what does true strength mean to you? Your thoughts might just inspire someone else. The late afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees lining Oakwood Park, casting dappled patterns on the winding pathways. It was a park for every season, with its well-kept playgrounds, sturdy benches, and stretches of grass where families picnicked or played frisbee. On weekends, it buzzed with activity, but on weekday afternoons like this one, it held a quieter charm. Ethan Parker settled onto his usual bench beneath the largest oak tree in the park. The seat's wood was worn smooth from decades of use, and its location provided just enough shade to stay comfortable. Ethan, now in his late 60s, appreciated the familiarity of this spot. It was his sanctuary. In his hands rested a book, its once vivid cover faded to muted browns and greens. The title, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, was barely legible, the edges of the pages soft from years of turning. He had read it countless times, but today, as always, it felt fresh, each line a reminder of life's fleeting beauty. Ethan had learned to value these quiet moments. A retired martial arts instructor, his life had once been a whirlwind of discipline, teaching, and competition. Now, he sought peace, and this park was where he found it. He enjoyed the rhythm of the world around him, the laughter of children on the playground, the bark of a dog chasing a stick, the occasional creak of a bike wheel as someone passed by. But today, that rhythm held an undercurrent of something sharper. From across the park, near the basketball court, came a series of loud laughs and shouts. Ethan glanced up, his gray eyes narrowing slightly. A group of teenagers had gathered near the court, their voices carrying across the open space. They were a motley crew of 5, tall, lanky boys with restless energy. Ethan had seen them before, their behavior as consistent as the changing seasons. They were loud, brash, and always looking for something or someone to entertain themselves with. Ethan returned to his book, though his senses stayed alert. He had spent too many years honing his instincts to ignore them now. "But you can't make it from here," Mason Harris said, his voice a mix of challenge and mockery. He spun a basketball on one finger, the sunlight glinting off its worn surface. Jordan Clay laughed, taking a few exaggerated steps backward. "Oh, I can make it. Watch and learn." He launched the ball with more confidence than skill, and it hit the rim with a hollow clang before bouncing away. "Nice try, Jordan," Tyler Green said with a grin, retrieving the ball. "Maybe next time aim for the hoop, not the clouds." Mason smirked, leaning against the chain-link fence surrounding the court. At 16, he was the unspoken leader of their group, his wiry frame and sharp eyes giving him an edge that the others instinctively followed. "I'm bored," Mason announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. He scanned the park with a predator's gaze, looking for something to break the monotony. "Yeah, me too," Noah Price added, though his tone was less eager. He leaned against the fence, his hands in his pockets. Noah wasn't like the others. He didn't relish chaos the way Mason did. But he stayed, partly out of habit and partly because he didn't want to be the one left behind. Mason's gaze landed on a man sitting alone beneath the oak tree, a book in his hands. The sight made him pause, his smirk curling into something sharper. "Hey, look at that guy," Mason said, nodding toward Ethan. "He's always here, isn't he?" "Yeah, I've seen him before," Tyler said, squinting toward the bench. "What's he even reading all the time?" "Probably something boring," Mason replied. He pushed off the fence, dribbling the basketball lazily as he walked toward the oak tree. "Let's go say hi." Ethan turned another page, letting the rhythm of Whitman's words settle his mind. But as the teenagers approached, their laughter growing louder, he felt a shift in the air. "Hey, old man," Mason called out, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. "What are you reading?" Ethan didn't look up. He turned another page, his movements deliberate. "Something you wouldn't find interesting," he replied calmly. Mason stopped a few feet from the bench, tossing the basketball between his hands. "How do you know? You don't even know me." Ethan glanced up briefly, meeting Mason's sharp gaze with his own steady one. "What do you find interesting?" The question caught Mason off guard. He wasn't used to being asked about himself, especially by someone who didn't seem the least bit intimidated. "I don't know. Lots of stuff." "Then we'll leave it at that," Ethan said, returning to his book. Mason's smirk faltered. He looked at his friends, who were watching from a short distance, their expressions uncertain. "You're lucky I'm feeling generous today," Mason said, taking a step back. "Enjoy your book, old man." Ethan didn't respond. As Mason walked away, his friends following, a flicker of something passed through his chest. Annoyance, maybe, or something deeper. The next day, Mason and his friends returned to the park, their energy heightened by the confrontation that lingered in their minds. "Let's see if he's there again," Mason said, leading the way. Ethan was on the same bench, his book opens as always. "What's the deal with this guy?" Jordan asked, his voice tinged with mockery. "Does he ever do anything else?" "Probably not," Mason said. He picked up a small stick from the ground, twirling it between his fingers. As they approached, Mason tossed the stick lightly, letting it land near Ethan's feet. "Hey, bookworm," he called out. "What's the word of the day?" Ethan didn't look up. He turned another page, his face impassive. Annoyed by the lack of reaction, Mason took a step closer. "You ignoring me?" Ethan finally spoke, his tone calm and measured. "I'm choosing not to engage with nonsense." Mason's friends stifled nervous laughs, but Mason felt his temper rise. He tossed the stick aside, his smirk returning. "Whatever, old man. You're not worth it anyway." As they walked away, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's calmness had gotten under his skin. That evening, Ethan returned to his modest home, a small one-story house nestled at the edge of the neighborhood. The home was unassuming, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a small porch where he often sat to watch the sunset. Tonight, however, he went straight to his study, his mind occupied by the teenagers from the park. He set his book on the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a worn leather journal. The journal had been his companion for decades, a place where he recorded his thoughts and observations. Ethan flipped to a blank page and began to write. "They're just boys, restless and searching. They remind me of myself at that age, angry, uncertain, and convinced the world owed me something. But anger without understanding is like a fire without a purpose. It burns everything in its path, including the one who holds it." He paused, tapping the pen against the edge of the desk. His thoughts drifted back to his younger years, to the anger that had once consumed him. It had taken years of discipline, guidance, and hard lessons to learn to control it. He wondered if these boys had anyone in their lives to guide them. Closing the journal, Ethan leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. He wasn't sure what the boys wanted from him, but he sensed that their anger was less about him and more about something they couldn't name. Mason lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily overhead. The confrontation at the park replayed in his mind, each word from Ethan gnawing at him. "Who does he think he is?" Mason muttered under his breath. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and opened the group chat with his friends. "Mason, let's go back tomorrow. That old guy's not as smart as he thinks." The responses came quickly. "Jordan, yeah, let's mess with him." "Tyler, I don't know. He didn't even do anything to us." "Mason, exactly. He just sits there like he's better than everyone." "No, maybe we should just let it go." Mason frowned at Noah's response, his fingers hovering over the screen. He typed back, "Mason, you scared of him or something?" No, just don't see the point." Mason didn't reply. He tossed the phone aside and stared at the ceiling again, his chest tightening. The next day, the group gathered at the park again, their energy buzzing with restless tension. Mason led the way, his strides purposeful as he headed toward the oak tree. Ethan was there, As always, his book opens on his lap. He didn't look up as the boys approached, but Mason knew he was aware of their presence. "Back at it, huh?" Mason called out, his tone casual but edged with defiance. Ethan turned a page. "The park is a peaceful place. I enjoy it. Doesn't seem so peaceful now," Jordan added with a laugh. The boys circled the bench, their voices growing louder as they cracked jokes and hurled harmless insults. Ethan remained calm, his eyes fixed on the page. Finally, Mason leaned closer, his frustration bubbling over. "Why don't you ever say anything? You think you're too good to talk to us?" Ethan looked up, his gray eyes meeting Mason's. For a moment, Mason felt a strange sense of unease, as though Ethan could see through him. "I don't think I'm better than you," Ethan said evenly. "But I do think you're better than this." Mason blinked, caught off guard. His friends exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to respond. "Let's go," Mason said abruptly, turning away. The others followed, their laughter quieter than before. Ethan watched them leave, his expression thoughtful. He closed his book and leaned back on the bench, letting the sounds of the park fill the silence. He had spent years cultivating patience, and it served him well now. He understood that change didn't happen overnight. It required time, effort, and a willingness to see beyond the surface. "They'll come back," he murmured to himself, not with dread, but with a quiet certainty. He could see the conflict in their eyes, the unspoken questions they didn't yet know how to ask. As the boys walked away from the park, their energy shifted. The usual banter felt forced, their jokes falling flat. "That guy's weird," Jordan said finally, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Mason replied, his tone clipped. "Thinks he's all wise or something." Noah hesitated before speaking. "I don't know. Maybe he's just tired of being bothered." Mason shot him a look. "Whose side are you on?" "No one's," Noah said quickly. "I'm just saying, he's not doing anything to us." Mason didn't reply. His frustration simmered beneath the surface, but he didn't know how to express it without sounding petty. The next time the boys approached the bench, they came with a plan, or at least Mason did. He grabbed a football from his car and tossed it lightly between his hands as they walked toward the oak tree. Ethan was in his usual spot, his book resting on his lap. "Hey, think fast," Mason called out, throwing the ball toward the bench. The ball landed on the ground near Ethan's feet. He glanced at it briefly before returning to his book. "Come on, old man," Mason said, his voice tinged with mockery. "You ever play catch? Or is that before your time?" Ethan didn't respond. His silence felt heavier than words, and it only fueled Mason's irritation. "You ignoring me again?" Mason demanded, stepping closer. Ethan looked up, his expression calm but firm. "I'm choosing not to entertain your behavior," he said. Mason opened his mouth to reply, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of response, calm, measured, and entirely unshaken by his bravado. After a moment, Mason turned away, motioning for the others to follow. "Whatever," he muttered under his breath. Let him sit there with his dumb book. Tyler and Noah lingered at the edge of the park, their eyes fixed on the oak tree where Ethan sat with his ever-present book. They had left Mason and Jordan behind, their unease about the group's behavior outweighing their usual loyalty. "You sure about this?" Tyler asked, shifting nervously. Noah hesitated, his hands in his pockets. "Yeah, we need to say something. It's just wrong what we've been doing." With a deep breath, they approached the bench. Ethan looked up as they neared, his calm expression betraying no surprise. "Hello," Ethan said, closing his book gently. Hi," Noah replied, his voice tentative. We wanted to say we're sorry. For, everything." Ethan studied them for a moment, his gaze steady but kind. "Apologies are a good place to start," he said. "But the real question is, what will you do next?" Tyler frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Saying you're sorry is easy. Changing your actions takes effort. It's not about what you say, it's about what you choose to do from here on." The boys exchanged glances, the weight of his words settling over them. "We'll do better," Noah said finally, his voice firm. Ethan smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can ask." Mason paced his bedroom, his frustration bubbling over. Tyler and Noah hadn't joined him and Jordan at the park that day, and their absence gnawed at him. "What's their deal?" Mason muttered, kicking an old sneaker across the room. "They're probably hanging out with that guy," Jordan said, sprawled across the bed with his phone in hand. Mason froze. "You think so?" "Yeah, they've been acting weird lately. All quiet and thoughtful. It's creepy." Mason didn't reply. A part of him was angry that his friends seemed to be drifting towards someone else's influence. But another part of him, quieter and harder to ignore, felt something else. Guilt maybe, or curiosity. The next afternoon, Tyler and Noah returned to the park, this time sitting on the grass near Ethan's bench. "You're welcome to sit closer," Ethan said with a faint smile. The boys hesitated before scooting closer, their movements awkward. "Why do you sit here every day?" Tyler asked, breaking the silence. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "To remind myself that peace is something we have to choose, moment by moment." "Peace?" Noah echoed, his brow furrowing. "Yes," Ethan replied. "It's not about avoiding conflict, it's about knowing how to face it without losing yourself." Noah tilted his head. "How do you do that?" Ethan placed his book on the bench beside him and leaned forward. "Would you like me to show you?" The boys nodded eagerly. Ethan stood and guided them to a small patch of grass. "We'll start with something simple. Breathing." "Breathing?" Tyler asked, confused. "It's the foundation of everything," Ethan said. "Control your breath, and you can control your mind." He demonstrated a slow, deliberate inhale, followed by an equally measured exhale. The boys followed suit, their movements clumsy but earnest. "Good," Ethan said after a few minutes. "It takes time, but with practice, it will become second nature." When Mason saw Tyler and Noah practicing with Ethan the next day, his frustration boiled over. He marched across the park, his strides quick and purposeful. "What are you guys doing?" Mason demanded, his voice sharp. Tyler and Noah stopped mid-motion, their faces flushing with guilt. "We're learning," Noah said hesitantly. "Learning what?" Mason snapped, his gaze darting to Ethan. "How to sit quietly and do nothing." Ethan stepped forward, his expression calm. "They're learning discipline, focus, things that can help them in life." Mason scoffed. "They don't need you to teach them that." Ethan met Mason's glare with unflinching steadiness. "Perhaps not, but they've chosen to learn, and choice is the first step toward growth." Mason's fist clenched, but he didn't reply. Instead, he turned and stalked away, his frustration mingled with something deeper and unease he couldn't shake. Over the next few weeks, Tyler and Noah continued their sessions with Ethan. Slowly, their movements became more fluid, their breathing more controlled. They found themselves looking forward to the calm and focus these moments brought. "You're getting better," Ethan remarked one afternoon, watching them practice a simple sequence of stances. "Thanks," Tyler said, his smile proud but humble. "It's harder than it looks." "That's the beauty of it," Ethan said. "The things that seem simplest are often the most profound." One evening, after another argument with his father, Mason wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood. His father's harsh words echoed in his mind, each one stinging like a fresh wound. "You never think," his father had shouted. "You act first and deal with the consequences later. When are you going to grow up?" Mason's steps eventually led him to the park. He stopped at the edge of the grass, his gaze landing on Ethan and the others. They were practicing quietly, their movements synchronized and deliberate. For a long moment, Mason watched, his emotions churning. Then, almost against his will, he walked toward them. "Mind if I join?" he asked, his voice gruff. Ethan looked up, his expression calm but welcoming. "Of course, everyone starts somewhere." The next day, Mason joined Tyler and Noah for their usual session with Ethan. Though his movements were stiff and uncertain, he didn't give up. "You're doing well," Ethan said as Mason completed a simple breathing exercise. Mason wiped sweat from his brow, his pride tinged with embarrassment. "Feels weird, like I'm trying too hard." "That's normal," Ethan assured him. "In time, it will feel natural." The encouragement lit a spark in Mason, one he hadn't felt in years. As the boys' sessions continued, they noticed something else about the park: the graffiti on the playground wall. The crude words and images felt out of place in the peaceful environment Ethan had helped them create. "We should clean that up," Noah suggested one afternoon. "Why?" Mason asked, though his tone lacked the usual edge. "Because it's the right thing to do," Tyler said simply. With Ethan's guidance, the boys spent an entire weekend scrubbing the wall and repainting it. By the end, their arms ached, but the satisfaction of seeing the clean, vibrant surface was worth it. "It looks amazing," Mason admitted, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Because you chose to make it better," Ethan said. The boys' efforts didn't go unnoticed. Parents began to approach them, offering thanks and words of encouragement. "You've done a great job here," one mother said, her young son clinging to her leg. "It's nice to see kids caring about the community." Mason felt a warmth in his chest, one he hadn't experienced before. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something meaningful. That evening, as Mason walked home, he found himself reflecting on the past few weeks. The anger and restlessness that had once driven him felt distant now, replaced by a sense of purpose. He thought of Ethan's words about choice, growth, and discipline and realized they weren't just lessons for the park. They were lessons for life. Mason sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He had just returned from another evening session at the park, his muscles sore, but his mind unusually clear. For weeks, he had been caught in a strange push and pull between his old habits and the lessons Ethan was slowly instilling in him. It wasn't just about the breathing exercises or the stances, it was about the way Ethan carried himself, unshaken by the chaos around him. Mason couldn't help but wonder, what would it feel like to have that kind of control over my life? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Lily's head poked in, her hair tied up in a messy bun. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Mason replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "You've been spending a lot of time at the park lately," she said, stepping inside. "Mom and Dad noticed." "They say something?" Mason asked, bracing himself for criticism. "No," Lily said with a shrug. "I think they're just surprised. You're not out causing trouble anymore." Her words stung, though Mason knew they weren't meant to hurt. "Maybe I'm trying to change," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Lily smiled faintly. "Good. About time." At the park the next day, Ethan introduced a new exercise. The boys stood in a line, their feet shoulder-width apart, their hands raised in front of them in a defensive posture. "This isn't about speed or power," Ethan explained. "It's about precision and control. Move with intention, not force." He demonstrated a sequence of blocks and counter movements, his body fluid and deliberate. The boys tried to mimic him, their movements jerky in comparison. "This feels weird," Tyler said, fumbling through a block. "Because it's new," Ethan said. "And new things always feel uncomfortable at first." Mason gritted his teeth as he tried the sequence again, his frustration bubbling. "Why does it have to be so slow?" "Because speed without control is chaos," Ethan replied. "And chaos won't serve you when it matters most." The words struck a chord with Mason, though he didn't fully understand why. That evening, Mason stayed behind after the others had left. He stood near the oak tree, watching as the last rays of sunlight bathed the park in gold. Ethan approached quietly, his footsteps soft on the grass. "You did well today," he said. Mason scoffed. "I kept messing up." "Everyone messes up," Ethan said. "The important thing is that you keep trying." Mason hesitated before speaking. "Why do you bother with us? You don't owe us anything." Ethan smiled faintly. "Because someone once bothered with me when I didn't think I deserved it. And because I see potential in all of you, even if you don't see it yet." The words settled over Mason like a weight, heavy but not unwelcome. A week later, a group of older teens arrived at the park, their loud voices cutting through the usual calm. Derek Reed led the group, his reputation as a troublemaker well known in the neighborhood. "Look at this," Derek said, smirking as he watched Mason and the others practicing with Ethan. "Karate lessons in the middle of the park. How cute." Mason tensed, his fists clenching instinctively. "Stay focused," Ethan said quietly, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder. Derek approached, his swagger exaggerated. "What's this about, huh? You guys think you're tough now?" "No one's trying to be tough," Ethan said evenly, stepping forward. We're just practicing discipline. Derek laughed. Discipline? Is that what they call standing around doing nothing? The tension was palpable, but Ethan's calm demeanor didn't waver. You're welcome to join us if you'd like, he said. Derek's smirk faltered for a moment before he recovered. You right? Like I'd waste my time on this. With a dismissive wave, Derek and his crew left, but the encounter left Mason on edge. After Derek and his group were gone, Ethan gathered the boys near the oak tree. People like Derek thrive on fear and attention, Ethan said. If you give him neither, he loses his power over you. But what if he doesn't back off? Mason asked, his frustration evident. Ethan's gaze was steady. Then you'll have to decide what kind of strength you want to show. Strength isn't about overpowering someone, it's about knowing when and how to act. The boys nodded, though the unease lingered. Over the next few weeks, the boys continued their sessions with Ethan. Tyler, in particular, began to notice changes in himself. He found that he was less reactive, more thoughtful in how he handled challenges. One afternoon at school, a classmate tried to provoke him, mocking his small stature. Normally, Tyler would have lashed out with a sharp retort, but this time, he simply smiled and walked away. Later, Noah caught up with him in the hallway. That was impressive, he said. What? Tyler asked. The way you didn't let him get to you. That's new. Tyler shrugged, though he felt a quiet sense of pride. Guess I'm learning something. Mason's progress was slower, his frustration often getting in the way. But one afternoon, as he practiced a particularly difficult sequence, something clicked. His movements flowed naturally, his mind focused entirely on the present. Good, Ethan said, nodding approvingly. You're starting to understand. Mason grinned, his confidence swelling. For the first time, he felt like he was in control not just of his body, but of his emotions as well. One Saturday, the boys decided to clean up the park as a way to give back. They picked up trash, repainted benches, and even planted flowers near the playground. By the end of the day, their hands were dirty and their muscles ached, but the sense of accomplishment was undeniable. This looks amazing, Tyler said, admiring their work. It's not just about how it looks, Ethan said. It's about the effort you put into making something better. Mason nodded, his gaze lingering on the freshly painted benches. For the first time in a long time, he felt proud of himself. The boys' efforts didn't go unnoticed. Parents began to stop by, thanking them for their work. You've really made a difference here, said Mrs. Harper, a mother of 2 young children. It's so nice to see young people caring about their community. Mason smiled awkwardly and used to the praise. It's nothing, he mumbled, though the warmth in his chest told a different story. As the weeks passed, the boys' bond with Ethan deepened. They began to see him not just as a mentor, but as a guide who had helped them find a better path. For Mason, the lessons went beyond the park. He started applying the principles of discipline and control to other areas of his life, from his schoolwork to his relationships with his family. And though the road wasn't always easy, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for far too long. A warm breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree as the boys practiced their stances in the park. Mason's focus was sharper than ever, his movements fluid as he mirrored Ethan's demonstration. You're improving, Ethan said, his tone encouraging. Mason grinned. Feels like I'm finally getting the hang of this. The moment was interrupted by the sound of loud laughter. The boys turned to see Derek and his crew approaching, their voices cutting through the calm of the park. Look who's still playing kung fu in the park, Derek jeered, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. Mason stiffened, his jaw tightening. Stay focused, Ethan said quietly, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder. Derek stepped closer, his smirk widening. What's the matter? You scared to take us on for real? Mason clenched his fists, but Ethan's calm presence kept him grounded. We're not here to fight, Mason said evenly. Derek laughed, a sharp sound that echoed across the park. Yeah, that's what I thought. With a dismissive wave, he walked away, but the tension lingered long after he was gone. After Derek's departure, the boys gathered under the oak tree, their usual post-practice banter replaced by uneasy silence. He's not going to stop, Tyler said, breaking the quiet. He'll keep coming back until he gets what he wants, Noah added. Ethan listened carefully before speaking. Derek is testing you. He wants a reaction because it gives him power over you. But you've already proven your strength by not giving in. Mason frowned, his frustration evident. But what if he takes it further? What if he tries to hurt someone? Ethan's expression turned serious. Then you act, but only to protect, not to retaliate. Strength is knowing the difference. A week later, Derek returned with a bolder approach. He walked straight to the boys as they practiced, his crew hanging back near the basketball court. "All right," Derek said, crossing his arms. "Let's settle this. You and me. Right here, right now." Mason straightened, his heart pounding. "I told you, we're not fighting you." "Scared, huh?" Derek sneered, stepping closer. "Thought so." Ethan moved between them, his calm but firm presence immediately diffusing some of the tension. "Enough," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't the place for that." Derek's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "You're lucky this old guy's protecting you," he said, jabbing a finger at Mason. Mason wanted to respond, but Ethan's gaze stopped him. "Let's go," Derek muttered, motioning for his crew to follow. But as he walked away, he called over his shoulder, "This isn't over." The next day, Mason found Ethan sitting on the bench, his book open as always. "I don't get it," Mason said, sitting beside him. "Why didn't you let me stand up to him? Maybe if I did, he'd leave us alone." "I don't get it," Mason said, sitting beside him. "Why didn't you let me stand up to him? Maybe if I did, he'd leave us alone." Ethan closed his book and looked at Mason, his expression thoughtful. "And what would that have accomplished?" "I don't know. Respect?" Mason replied, though the word felt hollow as he said it. Ethan shook his head. "Respect isn't earned through violence. It's earned through integrity. If you fought him, you'd be feeding his narrative. But by refusing to engage, you're showing him that his words and actions have no power over you." Mason sat quietly, mulling over Ethan's words. Deep down, he knew Ethan was right. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Derek had issued a public challenge to Mason and his friends, daring them to meet him at the park on Saturday evening. By the time the boys arrived, a crowd had already gathered. Parents, kids, and even some of Derek's crew watched from the sidelines, their faces expectant. Derek stood in the center of the basketball court, his posture cocky. "Took you long enough," he said as Mason and the others approached. "We're not here to fight," Mason said firmly, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Derek laughed. "Then what are you here for? To run away like cowards?" Mason's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. "We're here to tell you that this ends now. We're not playing your game anymore." The crowd murmured, and Derek's smirk faltered. Big talk for someone too scared to back it up. Ethan stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Derek hesitated, his confidence wavering under Ethan's steady gaze. "What's it to you, old man?" "It's everything to me," Ethan replied. "Because I see what you're trying to prove, and I'm telling you, you don't need to prove it." For a moment, Derek looked unsure. Then, with a frustrated growl, he turned and walked away, his crew trailing behind. As the crowd dispersed, Mason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That was intense," he said, his voice shaky. "You handled it well," Ethan said, his tone calm but proud. "You showed true strength by standing firm without resorting to violence." Mason nodded, a small smile forming. For the first time, he felt like he had won not by defeating an opponent, but by staying true to himself. In the weeks that followed, Derek didn't return to the park. The boys continued their sessions with Ethan, their focus sharper and their bond stronger than ever. One afternoon, Mason spotted a group of younger kids watching from the edge of the field. He walked over, his demeanor friendly. "Hey, you guys want to join?" The kids hesitated before nodding, their excitement evident. As Mason guided them through simple breathing exercises, Ethan watched from the bench, his heart swelling with pride. The boys had come full circle, transforming from restless troublemakers into leaders and mentors. The aftermath of the showdown with Derek rippled through the park and the surrounding community. Parents who had heard about the confrontation began praising Mason and the boys for their restraint. Teachers at school commented on the changes they noticed: quieter tempers, more focus, and a willingness to step in and help younger students. You're like celebrities now, Tyler joked one afternoon as the group walked home. It's weird, Mason admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. People are acting like we did something amazing. You did, Noah said. Most people would have fought back or run away. We didn't do either. The word struck Mason, though he didn't reply. Deep down, he knew Noah was right. Ethan continued to observe the boys from his usual spot on the bench. Their growth was evident not just in their movements, but in the way they carried themselves with quiet confidence rather than the brash arrogance they had once displayed. One evening, as they wrapped up practice, Ethan addressed them. You've all made great progress not just in your technique, but in understanding what true strength means. Mason tilted his head. But isn't there still more to learn? I mess up all the time. Ethan smiled. Growth doesn't end. Even I'm still learning. But the fact that you see your mistakes as opportunities to improve, that's the mark of someone who's truly strong. The boys exchanged glances, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling over them. For a while, it seemed as though Derek had given up. Weeks passed without a sign of him or his crew, and the boys began to relax. But peace rarely lasted long where Derek was concerned. One Saturday afternoon, as the boys were teaching a group of younger kids, Derek appeared at the edge of the field. He stood with his arms crossed, watching silently. Mason noticed him first, his stomach tightening. He's back, he muttered to Ethan. Ethan nodded, his expression calm. Let's see what he does. For several minutes, Derek simply watched. Then, as the kids dispersed, he approached. You think you're better than me now? Derek said, his voice low but charged. No one thinks that, Mason replied evenly. We're just doing our thing. Your thing, Derek scoffed. What, playing teacher to a bunch of little kids? They're learning discipline and respect, Ethan said, stepping in. Two things you could benefit from. Derek's eyes narrowed. You're lucky I haven't taught these guys a real lesson yet. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. You're angry, Derek. But this isn't the way to deal with it. Derek took a step closer, his posture threatening. And what do you know about me? I know enough, Ethan replied calmly. I know that the anger you're carrying will destroy you if you let it. For a moment, Derek faltered. Then, with a sharp laugh, he turned and walked away. The boys gathered around Ethan after Derek left, their faces tense. What's his deal? Tyler asked. Why won't he just leave us alone? Because he sees your growth as a threat, Ethan said. Bullies don't like change, they rely on people staying the same, so they can stay in control. But what if he comes back? Mason asked. Ethan's expression softened. Then you meet him with the same strength you've shown before. You don't need to prove anything to him, just to yourselves. The boys nodded, though the tension lingered. That evening, Ethan shared a rare glimpse into his past. There was a time when I thought strength meant never backing down, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I fought to prove myself, to show the world I wasn't weak. But all it did was hurt me and the people around me. What changed? Noah asked. My mentor est en repli. He showed me that real strength isn't about fighting, it's about restraint. It's about knowing when to walk away and when to stand firm. The boys listened intently, the weight of Ethan's words settling over them. Unbeknownst to the boys, Derek's hold on his crew was beginning to weaken. His constant need to assert dominance and his growing obsession with Mason and his friends had begun to wear thin. Why do you care so much about them? One of Derek's friends asked as they lounged at the basketball court. They're a bunch of wannabes, Derek snapped. Yeah, but they're not bothering us. Maybe we should just let it go. Derek glared at him, but the words stuck. For the first time, he felt the shaky foundation of his control beginning to crumble. One afternoon, as the boys were packing up their gear, a shy voice called out, Excuse me. They turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, clutching a basketball. Can you show me how to do that breathing thing? The boy asked, his cheeks flushed. Mason grinned, crouching to the boy's level. Sure. What's your name? Eli, the boy replied. All right, Eli, Mason said. First, you stand like this. As Mason guided Eli through the exercise, Ethan watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. The mural on the playground wall was finally finished, a sprawling oak tree with its branches reaching toward the sky. Beneath it, the boys had painted the words, Growth begins here. As they stood back to admire their work, parents and kids gathered around, their faces filled with admiration. "It's perfect," said Mrs. Harper, her young son tugging at her sleeve. "You've really made this park into something special." Mason felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he saw himself not as a troublemaker, but as someone who could make a positive difference. Derek didn't return to the park after that. Word spread that he had started spending less time with his crew and more time at home, helping his younger siblings with their homework. Mason and the boys noticed his absence, but didn't dwell on it. They had their own journey to focus on, and for the first time, it felt like they were moving forward. The oak tree stood proudly at the heart of the park, its sprawling branches a symbol of quiet strength. Beneath it, Mason and his friends led a group of younger kids through a series of simple exercises. "Breathe in," Mason instructed, his voice calm but firm. "And out, slowly. Feel your chest rise and fall." The kids followed his lead, their movements clumsy but earnest. Tyler and Noah moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. Ethan sat on the bench nearby, observing with a faint smile. It had been weeks since Derek's last appearance, and the park had become a sanctuary once more. Families picnicked on the grass, children laughed on the playground, and a sense of peace filled the air. Mason glanced toward Ethan, their eyes meeting briefly. He nodded in silent acknowledgement, and Ethan returned the gesture. The changes in the park didn't go unnoticed by the community. Word spread about the boys' efforts, and more people began visiting the once-neglected space. Local businesses donated benches and equipment, and volunteers planted flowers along the pathways. The mural of the oak tree became a centerpiece, a beacon of hope and growth. One Saturday, the mayor stopped by during one of the boys' sessions. He watched as Mason guided the younger kids, his movements confident and deliberate. "You've done something remarkable here," the mayor said, approaching Ethan. "It wasn't me," Ethan replied with a small smile. "It was them." The mayor nodded. "Still, it's clear you've had an impact. This park is better because of all of you." Ethan said nothing, but his pride was evident. At home, Mason's parents began noticing the changes in their son. He was more patient, more focused, and he had started helping around the house without being asked. One evening, as Mason and Lily worked on a puzzle together, their father entered the room. "You've been spending a lot of time at the park," his father said, his tone gruff but curious. Mason tensed, expecting criticism. "Yeah, is that a problem?" His father hesitated before shaking his head. "No, I think it's good. I've seen the difference it's making." Mason blinked, surprised. "Thanks, Dad." His father nodded, his expression softening. It was a small moment, but for Mason, it meant everything. Derek's absence from the park had puzzled the boys, but they didn't dwell on it. Then one afternoon, they spotted him walking along the edge of the field. He didn't approach, but he watched quietly as they worked with the younger kids. Mason approached him cautiously. "Hey." Derek looked up, his expression guarded. "Hey." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Derek sighed. "I've been thinking about what that old guy said. About anger." Mason nodded. "It's not easy to let go of." "No, it's not," Derek admitted. He hesitated before adding, "But I'm trying." Mason smiled faintly. "That's all that matters." The boys decided to thank Ethan for everything he had done. They pooled their money and bought a simple wooden plaque, engraved with the words, "For teaching us the meaning of true strength." They presented it to Ethan during their last session together, their emotions evident in their expressions. Ethan accepted the gift with a rare smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But remember, the best way to honor what you've learned is to pass it on." One crisp autumn morning, Ethan gathered the boys under the oak tree. The leaves had begun to turn, their vibrant colors signaling the change of seasons. "My time here is done," Ethan said, his tone gentle but firm. "What do you mean?" Tyler asked, his voice tinged with worry. "You've learned all you need to from me," Ethan replied. "Now it's your turn to lead to carry these lessons forward." The boys protested, but Ethan shook his head. "I'm not disappearing. I'm simply stepping back. This is your journey now." They nodded reluctantly, understanding the weight of his words. In the weeks that followed, The boys took on their new roles with pride. They organized park cleanups, led sessions for younger kids, and continued to embody the principles Ethan had taught them. "Feels weird being the ones in charge," Tyler admitted one day as they led a group through a breathing exercise. "Yeah," Mason said with a grin, "but it feels right too." Months later, Ethan returned to the park for a visit. He found the boys under the oak tree, guiding a group of kids through a sequence of stances. Their movements were fluid, their voices calm and encouraging. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. As he sat on the bench, a young mother approached with her toddler. "Are you Ethan?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He nodded. "My son talks about you all the time," she said, smiling. "He says you taught the boys who are teaching him now." Ethan's smile deepened. "It's their work that matters now. I just help them see it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat beneath the oak tree, his journal open on his lap. He wrote, "True strength isn't about what we keep for ourselves, it's about what we give to others. These boys have become the men I always knew they could be. My work here is done." He closed the journal, a sense of peace washing over him. As he left the park for the last time, Ethan knew the seeds he had planted would continue to grow, their roots stretching deep into the lives of those who had been touched by the lessons of strength, discipline, and compassion. As the screen fades from Ethan's silhouette walking away from the park, a soft instrumental melody plays in the background. The image shifts to the vibrant mural of the oak tree, its roots stretching deep into the soil and its branches reaching for the sky. The words beneath it, "Growth begins here," come into focus. A narrator's voice begins, warm and inviting. "Thank you for joining us on this journey of strength, redemption, and growth." If this story inspired you, don't forget to leave a like and share it with someone who could use a reminder about the power of kindness and resilience. The camera pans back, showing the park alive with activity kids playing, parents laughing, and Mason and his friends mentoring a new generation beneath the oak tree. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this, stories that show how one small choice can create a ripple of positive change. Together, we can grow stronger one step at a time. The screen transitions to an end card with the subscribe button, links to related videos, and the mural as the backdrop. The instrumental music swells, leaving viewers with a sense of hope and purpose.